The night my kitchen caught fire, the man everyone feared kicked down my door. Smoke filled the house like a lie spreading fast, and I could barely see, barely breathe. But I remember his hands, rough and certain, grabbing mine through the heat. They used to whisper that Leon Walker was dangerous, said he'd killed someone once, said he drank too much and prayed too little. But when the flames reached my window and the world turned red and cruel, he was the only soul who ran toward the fire. They called that kind of courage madness. I call it grace wearing burnt skin. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories from Grandma Evelyn. Because, child, that night I learned evil doesn't always live behind the loudest door, and neither does kindness. Maple Street was the kind of place that pretended to be peaceful. Every lawn was clipped within an inch of its life, every mailbox gleamed, and every secret wore perfume on Sundays. I'd lived there for nearly 30 years. I knew the rhythm of that street, the sound of Mrs. Tanner's wind chime, the gossip that started with "bless her heart," the neighbor who mowed too early, and the children who always cut through my yard, even though I told them not to. It was a quiet little corner of Georgia, full of polite smiles and soft judgments. And then there was the house next door, Leon Walker's house. Peeling paint, curtains always drawn, the grass a little too tall, the porch light always flickering but never fixed. He'd moved in after his wife passed, at least that's what people said. Nobody really knew. We just filled in the blanks with the ugliest colors we could find. Mrs. Tanner, God bless her noisy soul, was the first to start the rumors. "I heard he used to be a convict," she said one morning over the fence. "Killed a man in Atlanta. Doctor, maybe? Hard to tell. You know how people hide things." I nodded, not because I believed her, but because I didn't want to argue before coffee. Still, the thought stuck like a burr. You'd see Leon sometimes, out early, walking slow with his dog, an old mutt with one ear. He never waved first, but if you did, he'd nod once, polite but distant. And in a neighborhood where distance felt like guilt, that was enough to damn him. Every time he went to the store, someone watched from their window. When a child scraped a knee, someone said, "Don't let that man near him." We called it caution, but it was just fear dressed up in a Sunday hat. One afternoon, I was watering my lemon tree when I noticed Leon in his yard, digging. He worked slow, deliberate, the way men do when the work means something. Mrs. Tanner saw him too. "You see that?" she whispered, "digging again, probably hiding something." "What's he supposed to be hiding? Worms?" I asked. She didn't laugh. "You don't dig that deep unless it's trouble." Later, I found out it was an urn, his wife's ashes. He buried them under the magnolia tree because she loved the smell of its flowers. I didn't know that then. Back then, I just looked away. I'd like to tell you I was better than the rest of them, that I didn't listen to gossip or feed it, but that'd be a lie. Fear has a way of sounding logical when everyone hums the same tune. You start believing it just to fit in. So when I passed Leon on the sidewalk, I smiled, small, polite, but not kind. And when he nodded back, I looked away first. One night I heard a sound, piano music drifting from his house, low and mournful, like someone remembering something too beautiful to say out loud. It wasn't the kind of music a monster would play, but I still pulled my curtains shut. Weeks went by. The summer air grew thick, the way it does before something happens. The whole neighborhood seemed tense, barking dogs, snapping tempers, heat pressing against the glass. One evening, Mrs. Tanner knocked on my door, whispering, "Did you hear? Police were at Leon's house, lights flashing and everything." I peeked out the window. No lights, no noise, just the same flickering porch bulb. "Probably a misunderstanding," I said. But my stomach nodded anyway. That's what fear does. It doesn't need proof, just company. Then, one morning, as I sat with my coffee by the window, Leon stepped outside. He looked older than I remembered, shoulders slumped, face gray with something heavier than age. He bent down to pick up his newspaper, and his sleeve slipped. A long scar ran down his arm, pale and raised. For some reason, that mark haunted me. I told myself it was ugly, but maybe, deep down, I knew it was the kind of scar people don't get from violence. They get it from saving someone else. I wanted to ask. I didn't. I just sat there, sipping coffee gone cold, while the piano started again next door. Looking back now, I see how the story was already writing itself, one judgment at a time. We built a monster out of whispers, and none of us ever stopped to ask what he was made of. But life has a way of burning through the masks we build, and the night my kitchen went up in flames, truth came running through the fire, wearing his name. You could feel it building, like thunder that refuses to announce itself until it's sitting right over your house. Maple Street was quieter than usual that week, too quiet, the kind of silence that only happens when people are busy listening for trouble. The gossip about Leon had stopped being stories and started sounding like warnings. "He's out late again," Mrs. Tanner said one afternoon, peeking through her blinds like she was guarding national secrets. 3 nights in a row now, probably up to no good. I wanted to tell her that the world didn't revolve around what time a man bought his groceries, but instead I nodded and sipped my tea, because that's what you do when you don't want the fire pointed at you. Later that week, someone's cat went missing. By noon, they decided Leon took it. No one saw it, no one heard anything, but everyone knew. That's how fear works. It doesn't ask for evidence, just agreement. By sunset, Mrs. Tanner was standing on my porch again, voice lowered but eyes bright. "They ought to check his basement," she said. "That's where men like him keep secrets." I glanced toward Leon's house, curtains drawn, no sound, just that flickering light again. "He probably keeps old memories down there, not bodies," I said. She frowned. "You sound like you're defending him." "I sound like someone who minds her business." That earned me silence, the kind that cuts colder than an insult. A few nights later, a police car parked outside his house. Not sirens, just the quiet hum of suspicion. The officer knocked, stayed for 5 minutes, then left. No one asked what happened. We didn't need to. We'd already written the ending. The next morning, Leon's trash bins were turned over, papers scattered on the lawn, not by him, but by someone looking for proof. I watched him step outside, stoop down, and pick each paper up one by one. No shouting, no complaint, just quiet. He moved like a man used to being broken into. When he looked up, I was standing by the window. Our eyes met for half a second. He nodded once, that same polite nod. I froze, pretending I was just adjusting the curtains. Later, guilt came creeping, soft-footed, unwanted. One evening, I found an envelope in my mailbox, no stamp, just my name in neat handwriting. Inside was a photograph, a woman standing in a hospital room, smiling faintly. On the back it said, her name was Angela. She liked lemon pie. No signature, but I knew who sent it. Leon. I didn't understand it. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. But I taped the photo on my fridge anyway, next to old postcards and grocery lists. Something about her face made my kitchen feel warmer. That same night, Mrs. Tanner came over again, bringing peach cobbler and trouble. I saw him at the church parking lot, she said, just sitting there in his car, lights off. Maybe he was praying, I said. She blinked. Praying? Him? Everybody prays for something, I replied. Maybe, but not everyone gets heard. She left in a huff. When the door shut, I looked at that photograph again and wondered what it meant to be heard, truly heard, by anyone. A few days later, I saw Leon on his porch with a small box in his lap. He was sanding it, slow and careful. The air smelled like cedar. "Morning," I called out before I could stop myself. He looked up, startled, then nodded. "Morning, Mrs. Carter." His voice was low, not rough like I expected, but calm, deliberate. "What are you making?" I asked. "A music box," he said. "For who?" "For nobody." He smiled then, not wide, just enough to show he remembered how. That smile stayed with me longer than I'd admit. But the street didn't soften. People noticed that we'd spoken, and that was enough to turn their eyes on me too. Mrs. Tanner said it plain. "You be careful, Evelyn. You don't know what kind of man that is." I wanted to tell her that maybe no one knows what kind of man anyone is, that we're all just stories told by people who weren't there when the truth happened. Instead, I said, "I'll take my chances." She shook her head. That's how trouble starts. Maybe she was right, but sometimes trouble is just the name people give to things they don't understand. That night, it rained hard. I sat by the window, listening to thunder roll over the rooftops. Across the street, Leon's house glowed dimly. I could hear faint music, piano again, slow, full of ache. For a moment, I imagined him sitting there alone, the music box open, the ghost of his wife in every note. And for the first time, I wondered if fear and loneliness sound the same when played through piano keys. I went to bed that night thinking the street would wake up to more whispers, but it didn't. The air felt thick with something heavier than judgment, and then, sometime after midnight, I smelled smoke. Faint at first, then thicker, then everywhere. When I opened my eyes, the flames were already crawling up the kitchen curtains. And before I could even scream, I heard the sound of breaking glass and a voice I barely recognized shouting my name. The smoke came like a thief, soft at first, then brazen. It curled under the door with no shame, a gray snake slipping across the linoleum. I woke to the smell of something that wasn't coffee or lemon polish. It was the smell of heat and plastic and old wiring. My throat tightened before I realized why. The curtains by the kitchen window were already glowing at the edges, a little orange bloom, then another. The house was humming like a cage. I reached for my cane, but the room seemed farther than it had any right to be. The ceiling light looked like a pale moon swallowed by a fog. I coughed, and the room answered with a rough, dry cough of its own. Panic is a funny thing. At first, it makes your blood race. Then it tricks your legs into thinking they don't belong to you anymore. I remember thinking one small, foolish thing. Charles would have fixed this light weeks ago. That thought felt like a last polite greeting to my old life. The smoke alarm began a staccato, thin and angry. My ears rang. Somewhere beyond the noise, there was the sound of boots on gravel, a voice calling a name that sounded like mine through someone else's throat. At first, I thought it was Marcus. He'd be the type to yell, I decided. But the voice was deeper, rougher, and something in it held a kindness I hadn't expected from anyone on Maple Street. "Mrs. Carter, hang on! Where are you?" the voice shouted. I scrambled, coughing, toward the bedroom door. My lungs protested each breath, and the world narrowed into a tunnel of orange and gray. I could see nothing but the glowing outline of the doorway. My cane clattered uselessly to the floor. Then a shadow filled the doorway, tall, broad, moving like someone who didn't have time for the polite steps neighbors take when they're being watched. He should have been an intruder in any story that Mrs. Tanner would tell, the kind of man our neighborhood warned us about. But that night, he was a shape of 2 strong arms and a burned sleeve. "Here," he said, voice low and urgent, and his hand closed around mine. His skin was warm despite the smoke. His grip was sure, not gentle. There was no fussing, no soft words. He wrapped one of my arms over his shoulder, the other under my knees, and carried me through the house like I was the lightest thing he'd ever lifted. The plaster bit at his shirt, and sparks fell like useless stars. At one point, a beam ground and shifted, and he swore under his breath, but he didn't drop me. Outside, the air hit my face like an ocean. For a second, I thought I'd drowned dry. Neighbors streamed into the street, faces pale, flashlights and blankets in flailing hands. Someone screamed my name. Someone else prayed. Through the confusion, I could see him, Leon Walker, standing in my yard, his shirt smoking at the shoulder, hair plastered to his forehead, burned hand cradling my head as if it were fragile china. "You okay?" he asked, breathless. He sounded winded but steady, like a man who had been given a mission and wouldn't finish until it was done. I tried to speak. Smoke had turned my mouth into sand. Yes, it was a small, weak thing that felt like a lie. The firemen arrived then, lights flaring like indignation. The hoses sang, and the world began to look sensible again. Water, uniforms, authority. But I remember only 2 things from the next stretch of moments: his hand on mine in the ambulance, and the smell of something burning that followed him like a truth you can't wash off. In the hospital, I came to with the scent of antiseptic and the steady beep of machines. More reliable than Maple Street gossip, I decided. A young nurse named Naomi hovered at my side, her voice a soft thread through the fog. "You were lucky," she said. "A good Samaritan found you and pulled you out." She smiled, but something in her eyes held the rest of the sentence back. "Who?" I rasped, the word thin as a wire. "Leon Walker," she said, and I heard the name like a bell. "He has smoke inhalation and some burns to his hand. He's outside in the waiting lot. He insisted they let him go before they treated him further." Her eyebrows rose as if to say, proud and stubborn in one short man. Angels insist, I thought, and something in my chest loosened. I wanted to say thank you, to find the words that belonged to prayers, but my mouth wouldn't do the work, so I closed my eyes and listened. The next day, the hospital let me see him. He sat in a metal chair in the visitor's room, his left hand bandaged and swelling, the edges of the gauze singed. He looked smaller than the night before. Smoke has a way of taking some things and leaving other things clearer. When he saw me awake, his face tightened like a man who'd been waiting to see whether the thing he'd done mattered. "You should have let me burn," I said before I could stop myself. The words felt like a stone tossed into a deep pond. He blinked, surprised, then gave a bitter sort of laugh. "I couldn't," he said simply. "You were the only neighbor who ever said hello to me." The apology in that sentence had its own kind of bruise. It landed on me with a soft force I hadn't expected to carry from a stranger. My gratitude and my shame tangled together because I'd been guilty of the same sin the neighborhood had practiced, assuming a life based on rumor instead of fact. He shifted in the chair, and I noticed the scar on his forearm, pale, ridged, the kind of mark that belongs to men who have been near danger before. The bandage around his hand was dark in places with old soot. "You'll have to get that looked at," I said, throat still raw. He looked down at his hand and then back at me. "Got a feeling I'll end up okay," he muttered. "People like me make do." "How did you?" I began, then stopped. The questions felt petty next to what he'd done. He shrugged. "If somebody's calling for help, you go." His voice was steady, like a man used to making choices without applause. "A lot of people around here scared of their own shadows. You weren't." The truth of that struck me like cold water. I had been the polite neighbor who didn't ask too many questions. Not brave, not friendly either, just careful. Yet in my little acts of civility, I had somehow been an island in his long season of exile. Later, when the stretcher came for him, I reached for his bandaged hand. It was warm and rough, and the skin where his fingers curled over mine felt like a map of small casualties, calluses, a faded burn near the base of his thumb. A man who had lived and lost and still kept moving. I squeezed his fingers, clumsy and grateful. "Thank you," I managed, the words like a benediction, "for running toward the fire." He shook his head as if to clear it, and for the first time, his expression softened into something that looked close to sorrow. "I didn't run toward the fire to be thanked," he said. "I ran because someone once ran for me." We didn't know who that someone was then. We still don't, not fully. But the night had a way of showing us what we'd been blind to before it started. Flames strip off the varnish we paint people with. They make whatever is true, not pretty, not chosen, just true. By the time the house was gutted and the neighbors stopped staring like a jury, Leon had disappeared into the hospital corridors, bandaged and stubborn and impossible to put into the boxes Maple Street preferred. That night, as I lay on sheets that felt too clean, I thought about the piano notes I'd heard drifting through his house and the photograph with the handwritten note about lemon pie. I thought about Mrs. Tanner's sharp mouth and the way we all had been quick to shape a life out of rumors. I thought, too, about the scar on Leon's arm and how scars are the writing of survival. Maybe the story of the man next door was not what we'd been told. Maybe it was a story we'd been too cowardly to ask about. Outside the window, Maple Street slept uneasy, but I felt something new stir in me, a question that would not let me rest. If a man the neighborhood labeled dangerous could be the one to carry me through fire, what else had we misread? The night had done its work. It had burned away the safe assumptions and left me with something harder to swallow, the truth. And truth, child, is the kind of thing that makes you show up differently the next morning. Hospitals have a smell that's part bleach, part memory. You can't scrub one out without stirring up the other. When I woke again, sunlight cut through the blinds in neat little stripes. Naomi, the nurse, was there with her clipboard and her soft eyes. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Carter?" she asked. "Like a pie someone left in the oven too long," I said. My voice rasped, but she laughed politely anyway. "You're lucky," she said. "That fire spread fast." I know who I owe for that. Her expression shifted, something between gratitude and guilt. "Mr. Walker saved your life. He's down the hall, waiting for his discharge papers." I blinked. "Down the hall?" "Yes, ma'am. He refused to go home until we confirmed you were awake. Said he just wanted to know you were breathing." The words hit harder than the smoke ever did. "You're telling me the man y'all thought was dangerous sat in this building all night just to make sure I wasn't dead?" Naomi smiled. "People surprise us, Mrs. Carter, especially the ones we don't bother to know." I found him later in the hospital courtyard, sitting on a bench under a half-dead oak tree, bandaged hand resting on his knee. He looked smaller in the daylight, not weak, just human. I cleared my throat. "So, this is what the neighborhood monster does on his day off." He looked up, startled. Then he smiled, slow. "I don't get many visitors." You should, I said, lowering myself onto the bench beside him. Seems you're better company than most. He chuckled. Only on the days I'm not setting fires. I winced at the joke, but he didn't seem to notice. He was staring at his hands, one scarred, one burned. You're a strange man, Mr. Walker, I said. So they tell me. I mean strange in a good way. You run into burning houses, but won't tell a soul why. He shrugged. You ever explain every good thing you do? That's different. Is it? He asked softly. Or is it just that folks only ask when they can't make sense of it? I watched him for a while, the way his eyes flickered toward the smoke-stained horizon as if checking on something no one else could see. Finally, I asked, You used to be a doctor, didn't you? He went still. Who told you that? Your nurse, Naomi. He sighed. That woman's got a kind heart, but a loose mouth. So it's true? He nodded once. Used to be, yes. What happened? He rubbed the back of his neck. A mistake. Whose? Mine, he said, then added, but not the way they said it was. He leaned back, eyes half closed, and started to talk. Not the kind of talking that looks for pity, the kind that comes from carrying a story too long. I was a trauma surgeon, he said, worked 20 years in Atlanta. One night, we brought in a car crash victim, white woman, mid-30s, internal bleeding. I operated for 6 hours, saved her, but her husband? He paused, jaw tightening. He didn't make it. The family, they needed someone to blame. Said I was drinking, said I botched the procedure. The hospital wanted quiet, so they made it easy for the family to win. Lost your license? I whispered. Everything, he said simply. License, marriage, name. When people lose their faith in you, it's easier to let them keep it gone. I didn't speak for a while. The wind rattled the oak leaves, sounding like whispers we both ignored. So you moved here, I said. He nodded. Bought that house cheap. Figured it was punishment and peace rolled into one. Then the rumors started. Didn't take long. I bit my lip. You could have told someone. He smiled sadly. Would it have mattered? Once people make you a villain, every truth you tell sounds like a trick. We sat there a long time, two old souls with too many ghosts. He told me about his wife, Angela, the woman in the photo. She used to make lemon pie, he said, smiling faintly. Every Sunday after church, said the smell reminded her of sunlight. Funny, I murmured. That's what I thought about my kitchen. He nodded, eyes shining. She loved that magnolia tree out front. Buried her ashes there when the cancer took her. So that's what you were digging. He looked surprised. You saw me? I did, I admitted, and I let them talk about it. I should have said something. He waved it off gently. You said hello once. That was enough. No, I said firmly. It wasn't. He met my eyes then, and I saw it. The kind of weariness that only comes from being good in a world that doesn't care. You know, I said quietly, maybe God didn't send that fire to punish me. Maybe he sent it to reveal you. He smiled, not wide, just true. Then he's got a cruel sense of humor. When I got back to my room, Naomi stopped me in the hallway. Did he tell you everything? As much as he needed to, I said. She nodded. He's leaving tonight, said he doesn't like goodbyes. I stood there for a long moment. Then I said, tell him the next time he runs into a burning building, he better let someone else return the favor. She grinned. I'll tell him. But when I looked out the window later that night, his house was dark. The porch light, the one that never stopped flickering, was finally still. I didn't see Leon for days after that, and every evening I found myself listening for that piano. The street felt emptier without its villain. Or maybe we'd just run out of excuses for our own cowardice. A week went by before I found the courage to walk over to Leon's house. The air on Maple Street had that stale quiet that follows gossip when it runs out of breath. People still peeked through blinds when they saw me walking with my cane, but no one said a word. Silence can be louder than sirens when it's carrying shame. His yard was the same. Untamed grass, chipped paint, the magnolia tree bending in the heat like it was tired of standing guard. The piano music was gone, though, and somehow that hurt more than the fire ever had. I stood at the gate, debating if knocking made me brave or foolish. Then I remembered the smoke, his hands pulling me through the flames, and decided foolishness had already saved my life once. I knocked. Once, twice. Nothing. Just when I was about to leave, the door creaked open. He stood there, bandaged hand tucked in his pocket, shirt sleeves rolled up. "Well," he said quietly, "didn't expect company." I replied, "Seems you've got a fan club now." He chuckled, that same low, guarded laugh. "A fan club, huh? I must have missed the parade." I lifted the pie dish I'd been holding. Lemon, of course. "It's not a parade, but it's a start." He stared at the pie for a long second, eyes softening. "Angela used to make lemon pie." "I know," I said. "You told me. Consider this an apology." He stepped aside, motioning me in. Then I guess I can't refuse. His house was smaller inside than it looked from the street. Dust motes danced in the light slanting through half-open blinds. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something else, like time that hadn't been touched. A piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed, a framed photo of a woman resting on top. I recognized her from the picture he'd left me. "She was beautiful," I said softly. "She was better than that," he replied. "She was kind." We sat at the kitchen table, two old souls surrounded by echoes. He poured coffee, hands steady despite the bandages. "So," he said, "how's the new kitchen?" "Still standing," I said, smiling faintly. "Not sure about the rest of me." He nodded, serious. "Takes time to come down from a fire. You don't just put out the flames. You've got to live with the smoke." I looked at him for a long moment. "You sound like a man who's had a lot of practice." "Too much," he admitted, "but that's how it goes. The world burns you. You learn to stop flinching at heat." We talked for hours, not about tragedy or forgiveness, about simple things, coffee brands, weather, music, the sound of real silence versus the kind that hides something. He told me Angela used to play that piano every Sunday morning, said she could make a hymn sound like a confession. After she passed, he stopped playing. "Didn't feel right without her," he said. "Music belonged to her more than to me." "Then play for her anyway," I said. "You always bossy like this?" "Only when people mistake grief for loyalty," I said. He smiled, really smiled this time. "You talk like a preacher." "Not quite. I just survived enough Sundays to know the sermon never ends." He stared at the piano for a long time, then stood and lifted the fallboard. His bandaged hand trembled slightly as he touched the keys. The first note came out cracked, dusty, but then another followed, and another, until the house began to remember what joy sounded like. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. When he finished, he sat back down and exhaled. That hurt more than I expected. The music? The remembering. I nodded. It always does, the first time. After that day, we made it a ritual. Every Wednesday afternoon, I'd come by with a pie or a pot of coffee, and he'd play something new. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes silence did the heavy lifting. Word got around, of course. Maple Street has more ears than houses. Mrs. Tanner stopped me one morning at the mailbox. "You still visiting him?" she asked, eyebrows arching like she expected me to deny it. "I am," I said. She pursed her lips. "You're braver than I thought." "No," I said, "just better informed." She huffed and walked off, muttering about old fools and lost causes. But I saw her that evening, standing on her porch, listening to the faint sound of Leon's piano. Her face softened a little, like a wall remembering it used to be a window. As weeks turned into months, the neighborhood shifted. People waved at Leon now, cautious waves, but waves nonetheless. He fixed a few broken fences, helped carry groceries for Mrs. Whitfield down the street, even built a birdhouse for the elementary school. No one called him a monster anymore. They called him that quiet gentleman. Funny how a new story erases the old one once it's safe to say aloud. One day I asked him, "Do you ever regret saving me?" He laughed. "Every time you bring me another pie." "I'm serious." "So am I," he said. "You forced me out of hiding. Hard to regret something that dragged me back into life." I looked down at my coffee, steam curling between us. "You know, people don't change easy." "Sure they do," he said. "They just don't like the part where it hurts." The magnolia tree bloomed early that year. He called me outside one morning to see it, white petals glistening under dew. "She'd have loved this," he said, voice soft. "Angela?" He nodded. "I used to think she was the last person who ever saw me right, but maybe not." I smiled. "You give me too much credit." "No," he said. "You gave me a reason to be more than what they said I was." We stood there in silence, the kind that feels like forgiveness. Later that evening, I sat by my window with a notebook. I wrote, "Fear makes fools of good people, but love, in its quiet way, rebuilds what fear burns down." Weeks later, he left a gift on my porch, a small wooden box, polished and plain. When I opened it, a soft tune played, Angela's song. Under the lid, a note in his careful handwriting. "For when the world forgets to be kind, play this." I did, and for the first time since the fire, I cried, not from fear, but gratitude. The last time I saw Leon alive, the world felt like it was finally exhaling. The magnolia tree was in full bloom, its petals spilling onto his porch like quiet blessings. He was standing there with a cup of coffee, same as always, dog lying lazy at his feet. He waved when he saw me. "Mornin', Miss Evelyn," he said. "Mornin', Dr. Walker," I teased. He chuckled. "Now don't start that. Haven't earned that title in a long time." "Maybe not on paper," I said, "but saving lives should count for something." He smiled, soft and almost shy. "Then I guess I'm retired with honors." I didn't know it would be the last time. Life doesn't tell you when it's about to take someone. It just keeps moving, expecting you to catch up. 2 days later, Mrs. Tanner knocked on my door. Her face was pale, the way it gets when bad news has already taken root. "Evelyn," she whispered, "it's Leon. They found him this morning." I didn't need her to finish. "Heart failure," they said, "peaceful. The kind of ending we hope for, though never when it comes too soon." The town didn't quite know what to do with that information. The man they once whispered about was suddenly the man they mourned. Even Mrs. Tanner cried. She stood in her yard that afternoon, holding a bouquet of magnolia blossoms, muttering prayers half under her breath. When I went into his house, cleared for friends by the sheriff, I noticed how neat everything was. The piano dusted, the coffee cup washed and drying in the sink. On the kitchen table sat a single envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was careful, like someone who didn't want to rush their goodbye. I sat down and opened it. "Evelyn, if you're reading this, I guess the good Lord finally clocked me out. Don't let them make a fuss. I've had my share of noise in this life. I wanted to tell you thank you, not for the pie, though it was pretty fine, for something quieter, for seeing me, for letting the truth breathe again. Angela used to say everyone deserves one witness, someone who knows who they really were when the world stops looking. You were mine. If there's a service, tell them to play the song from the music box. She'd like that. People feared me because I stopped defending myself. I thought silence would keep me safe. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe God sent that fire to let someone finally see me. Don't be too sad. I'm just going home the long way. Leon. I sat there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. The air smelled of lemon and sawdust, like memory itself. Later that week, I called Pastor Riley to arrange the funeral. He didn't hesitate. "We'll hold it at the church," he said. "Doesn't matter what people said before. A man who saves a life deserves a house of grace." When I walked into that chapel, it was standing room only. The same neighbors who had crossed the street to avoid him were now clutching handkerchiefs. The piano played softly, Angela's tune. Mrs. Tanner sat beside me, tears streaking her makeup. "He was a good man," she said. "He always was," I replied. "We just took too long to notice." The pastor spoke about mercy, about how judgment blinds us, and how God hides angels in strange places. When he finished, I stood. My knees shook, but my voice didn't. "I owe my life to Leon Walker," I said, eyes sweeping the room. And not just because he pulled me from a burning house. He taught me that fear is the easiest sin to commit and the hardest one to confess. We feared him because it was simpler than knowing him, and now we don't get another chance. Silence fell heavy, but not uncomfortable. Then, slowly, one by one, people began to stand. Mrs. Tanner first, then the Whitfields, then the fire chief. The whole town on its feet for the man we'd once hidden behind curtains. After the service, I walked to the magnolia tree. The wind rustled its leaves like applause. Beneath it sat a small plaque someone from the city had put up. Leon Walker, 1954-2024. A healer, a neighbor, a good man. I touched the cool metal with my fingertips. "Took them long enough," I whispered. The dog, old and tired, wandered over and sat beside me. I scratched behind his ear. "He's home now, boy." The music box tune drifted out of the church, sweet and slow, filling the air with something that felt like forgiveness. And for once, Maple Street didn't whisper, it just listened. That night, I sat at my window, notebook open, pen in hand. I wrote, "It's easy to build monsters when you don't plan on ever meeting their eyes. But if you do, you might just see God staring back." I closed the notebook and watched the magnolia petals fall under the streetlight, white against the dark, like pieces of peace. It's been 3 months since Leon Walker left this world, and Maple Street still feels different. Quieter, but not the kind of quiet that hides guilt anymore. The kind that remembers. The magnolia tree out front still blooms, stubborn as ever. Every morning when I open my window, I see those white petals drifting down his porch steps, like grace trying to touch the ground. Some folks say the tree smells sweeter now. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's just what happens when peace finally settles somewhere it was once afraid to stay. I walk past his house most days, cane tapping in rhythm with the soft hum of memory. The curtains are open now. The new owners are a young couple with a baby. They play music on Sunday mornings, loud and joyful. Not the old piano, but a guitar, cheerful and imperfect. And every time I hear it, I think of Leon and how sound can heal what silence once buried. Mrs. Tanner stops me sometimes. She's quieter too. "I still think about him," she told me the other day. "Didn't sleep much after the funeral. I keep hearing that song in my head." "You're supposed to," I said. "That's how guilt sounds when it's turning into understanding." She nodded, eyes wet. "I was wrong about him." We all were, I said. The trick now is to be right about the next one. That shut her up, but in a good way. Sometimes wisdom lands better when you stop talking. I kept Leon's letter folded neatly inside my Bible. Some nights I read it again, especially that line. People feared me because I stopped defending myself. That one haunts me. It makes me wonder how many people we've buried under our silence, how many lives we've labeled so we don't have to see ourselves in them. It's easy to love the people who make sense to us. It takes faith to love the ones who don't. The world has its strange ways of teaching mercy. Sometimes it uses fire. Sometimes it uses loss. And sometimes it uses the very person you thought you had all figured out. Leon's story taught me that good and evil aren't houses sitting on opposite ends of the street. They live right next door to each other, sometimes even sharing the same fence. And when you learn that, you start knocking a little softer, speaking a little slower, and judging a whole lot less. Last Sunday, the church choir sang a new hymn. The lyrics were simple. Light doesn't choose who it shines on, it just does. I sat in the back pew, eyes closed, and thought, maybe that's what forgiveness really is, light that doesn't ask permission first. After service, Pastor Riley asked if I'd say a few words. I walked up to the pulpit, leaned on my cane, and looked out at faces that finally knew better. I used to think evil looked like a monster, I said. Turns out it looks more like fear wearing pride's clothing. And goodness, it's quiet. It doesn't need applause. It just walks through fire when nobody else will. No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. Sometimes truth just sits in a room and breathes for a while. When I got home that evening, I sat by my window with a cup of tea and the little wooden music box Leon had left me. I wound it once, and the melody filled the air, faint, fragile, but still alive. I thought about him, about the way he smiled that day under the magnolia tree, about how his life burned down and bloomed again, and how mine did too, in its own way. The tune slowed, each note softer than the last, until the final one lingered in the air like a prayer that didn't need words. If you've listened this far, you already know what I learned. Fear builds walls. Love burns doors in them. Turns out the monster next door was the only angel left on the block. And maybe, just maybe, that's how God works, using the broken to remind the blind what light looks like.